If you're the middle child in a 3-child family, you're most likely the forgotten one. Nobody cares about your accomplishments. It's a tough gig. Now, what if you're in a family where all 3 siblings are professional NASCAR drivers? But let's add some additional variables to the situation. What if your older brother is a Cup Series champion and your younger brother is an eccentric, funny guy beloved by fans? Well, if you're that middle child, you're about to be forgotten. You're about to have all your accomplishments swept under the rug. You're even the one with the boring, forgettable name. We're sorry to have to do this to you, Mike, but you're a strange starter.
That is Mike Wallace. Okay.
He is going to take round number 1 of the NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series.
Mike just not giving in.
Look at Mike Wallace in the 4 on the bottom.
Wallace is going to win it.
How about this run for Mike Wallace? He started 43rd.
Mike Wallace makes the pass on the inside of the number 1, so Wallace out in front of the field. It's going to be Mike Wallace who's going to win this one at Talladega.
And that is a Kevin Harvick Incorporated win right there.
Oh, God. I am so excited.
Hey,
great job, Mike Wallace. Great job, Ron.
Mike Wallace was the final of the 3 Wallace brothers to make it to NASCAR. By his Busch Series debut in 1990, his brother Rusty was already a Cup Series champion, and his younger brother Kenny already had a full season of the Busch Series under his belt. Mike made his NASCAR debut in the Busch Series in 1990 at Martinsville, driving the number 40 Lowe's Foods Chevy for Reno Enterprises, and had a very strong day, finishing in the 6th position after starting 24th. In 1991, Mike would run 9 Busch races between Highline Racing's number 18 Pontiac, his brother Rusty's number 93 Pontiac, and a third car, the number 11. It had an unlisted owner. No, I'm serious, like there's no owner listed on Racing Reference. It just says number 11. I don't know who owned it. He had 2 top 10s in these 9 starts, including a 3rd place finish at Lanier Speedway. He also made his Cup Series debut in 1991, driving the number 52 Alka-Seltzer Pontiac for Jimmy Means at Phoenix and Atlanta. In 1992, Mike catches a bit of a break as he signs with Moroso Racing in the Busch Series to drive the number 20 Oldsmobile. Unfortunately, Wallace was released from the ride mid-season after some lackluster results. Wallace ended up finding a ride later that season with Barry Owen's number 9 team. Their original driver, Clifford Allison, had suffered fatal injuries in a practice crash in Michigan. It was a tough gig for Mike to take, considering he was replacing a driver who had just passed away, but Mike was able to honor Clifford's memory by getting a top 10 finish in his first race with the team at Dover. He also earned a 2nd place finish at Martinsville late in the year, which was a new career best for him. Owen also fielded a Cup Series car in 2 races for Wallace, and he earned a best finish of 20th at Atlanta. In 1993, Mike finally gets to go full-time Busch Series racing. He continued to drive Barry Owen's number 9 FDP Brakes Oldsmobile, earning 9 top 10 finishes and a 12th place finish in points. He actually failed to qualify at Richmond, but he was able to work a deal with the number 64 Shoemaker Racing team to get behind the wheel of their car and ensure he would at least start every race that season. Mike again made a few Cup starts that season, driving in 3 races for Owen's team and 1 for Jimmy Means, earning a best finish of 15th. So now we're only 4 years into Mike Wallace's career, and he's already driven for 8 different owners. In 1994, Mike signed deals to race in both the Busch Series and the Cup Series. In Busch, he'd continue racing for Barry Owen, and in Cup, he signed with journeyman team owner Junie Donlavey. He ended up starting just 22 of the 28 Busch races that season, but it was his breakout year. He won 3 races and had an average finish of 15th. In the Cup Series, he competed in 22 of the 31 races, earning 1 top 10 at the season finale in Atlanta. For 1995, Mike signed on for the full Cup season with Donlavey's team and a partial season in the Busch Series with Barry Owen's team. They actually changed their number from 9 to 90 because sometimes it's nice to drive the same number in both Cup and Busch, I guess. He earned just 1 top 10 in the Cup Series and failed to qualify for 5 races. It was a really rough year for Junie Donlavey's team, but this was a very competitive era of NASCAR. It was the mid-90s. Everybody was good. It was tough to find success on the track. In the Busch Series, he earned 9 top 10s but failed to reach victory lane. But he also made his Truck Series debut that season for the Mittler brothers at North Wilkesboro, finishing 29th. Wallace returned to Donlavey Racing for the 1996 Cup season, but was released after the first 12 races of the year and 2 DNQs. In the Busch Series, Barry Owen again fielded the number 90 car, and Wallace drove in 17 races, earning 5 top 10s. 1997 would mark the beginning of a transition in Mike Wallace's career. He again started the season with a full-time Cup Series ride. He drove the number 91 Spam Chevy for LJ Racing, but qualified for just 7 races and 15 attempts before he and the team parted ways. In the Busch Series, he made 6 starts for Welrich Racing in the number 7 Chevrolet, but failed to finish better than 17th. So this season may have been going poorly for Mike in both the Cup and the Busch Series, but he did show a glimmer of hope in the Truck Series. He made 15 starts in Ken Schrader's number 52 Purolator truck and had 7 top 10 finishes, including 4 straight top 10s at the end of the season. So in 1998, Mike decided to go full-time Truck Series racing. Now this is a theme we're going to see with a lot of the strange starters that we'll end up covering. Sometimes you just have to go down to a lower series and reinvent yourself to prove to people that you deserve a Cup Series ride. In fact, this will be repeated later on in Mike's career. Mike drove the full 1998 Truck Series season for Ken Schrader, earning 3 top 5s, 11 top 10s, and finished 13th in points. He also drove in 6 Busch races that year for 3 different teams and ran the Daytona 500 for Phil Barkdahl, finishing 23rd. In 1999, Mike signed on with powerhouse Truck Series team Ultra Motorsports to take over the number 2 Team ASC Ford that had been vacated by Mike Bliss, another strange starter alum. Mike got right down to business, winning the season opener at Homestead. He won again at Pikes Peak, had a miraculous 12 top 5 finishes, and finished 6th in points. Mike also made 1 Busch Series start that year for PRW Racing, and drove in the Daytona 500 again for Junie Donlevy, finishing 23rd. He even attempted a few Cup races for Ultra Motorsports in the number 32 Ford, making 1 start at Richmond. In 2000, Mike once again started off the Truck Series season by winning the season opening race. For the first time ever, the Truck Series was going to the high banks of Daytona International Speedway. In Mike Wallace fashion, his win was very forgettable due to Jeffrey Bodine's horrific crash getting 99% of the press coverage on race day. Mike won again that season at Massa Marin and had 13 top 5s, which earned him a 4th place finish in points. He had an outside shot to win the title late in the year, but engine failures in the final 2 races ultimately sealed his fate. But of course, Mike did more than just Truck Series racing in 2000. He also ran 8 Busch races for PRW Racing, but for the first time since 1991, he did not start a Cup race. So now it's 2001 and the new millennium is in full swing. NASCAR's at its peak of popularity, and sponsorship money is just flowing like tap water. Mike's Truck Series owner Jim Smith made the decision that he needed to grow in the sport and decided to buy the remains of Mate Racing's Cup Series effort and start his own Cup team. Ultra Motorsports then entered the full 2001 Cup Series season with the number 7 Nations Rent Ford and moved Mike up to drive for the team. Mike earned a 6th place finish in the Daytona 500 and everything looked great for the team in terms of on-track performance. Then they immediately fell off a cliff and had finishes of 30th or worse in 6 of the next 7 races. Mike then earned a 9th place finish at Talladega and was beginning to show some great skill at driving on the superspeedways. After failing to qualify at Charlotte and Michigan, the team opted to replace Mike for several races. Ted Musgrave drove the car at Pocono, and Robbie Gordon drove the car at Sonoma. He actually almost won the race at Sonoma, but then he kind of did what Robbie Gordon does, where he raced a car that was a lap down, and Tony Stewart got by him, and yeah, he finished 2nd. Just, if the lap car is faster, guys, just let the lap car pass you. But you know what? Race is gonna race. Wallace then returned to Daytona, finishing 10th, which gave him top 10s at all the speedway races so far that season, before Robbie Gordon took the reins at Chicagoland. Wallace was then back in the seat at Loudon and Pocono, earning another top 10, but then failed to qualify at Michigan and Watkins Glen. He would make just 6 more starts for the team before being released in favor of Kevin LePage. Imagine getting fired and getting replaced by Kevin LePage. But that's not really fair. You know what, at that point in his career, Kevin was like a pretty decent driver. He could qualify for races, and you know what? He's a strange starter in his own right. But all was not lost for Mike, because you know, sometimes when a door closes, a window opens. After driving his final race for Ultra at Kansas, he was hired on by Roger Penske to drive the number 12 Ford as a teammate to his brother Rusty. The team had just released Jeremy Mayfield and needed a driver to run the final 8 races of the season. This is like finding out that your flight got canceled, but then the gate agent's like, don't worry, we have you on another flight that's gonna get there earlier and has free alcohol. Mike immediately showed what he could do in top equipment and earned an 8th place run in Martinsville. A few weeks later at Phoenix, he battled up front all day, leading 45 laps before finishing 2nd. Oh yeah, and he also ran 8 Busch Series races for the Biaggi brothers that season, earning a top 10 at Richmond. So Mike has really developed into a driver with a lot of skill on super speedways and on the low banking, sort of flatter racetracks, and that's a theme that's going to continue throughout his career. So what's Mike gonna do in 2002? Well, he can't stay with Penske because he has this young guy named Ryan Newman who's gonna come up and drive the 12 car, so no dice there. There's no other full-time Cup teams that come calling, so Mike does what strange starters do. He uses his connections to manufacture enough racing to keep himself busy. He ran about half of the 2002 Busch Series season for the Biaggi brothers in the number 4 Geico Ford, but the team had a dismal year. They failed to qualify 3 times and their best finish was 14th. Fortunately for them, Geico stayed loyal to the team and actually continued to sponsor them for several years. This even sort of started a long-term relationship between Geico and Mike Wallace. In the Cup Series, Mike made 4 starts for Andy Petree's number 33 team. He ran both Daytona races, Rockingham, and Talladega in the spring. At Chicagoland, he filled in for an injured Johnny Benson in the number 10 car and was then hired by AJ Foyt Racing to finish the season in the number 14 Conseco Pontiac. Foyt had used a revolving door of drivers through the previous 4 seasons, and Mike came in to replace their most recent send-off, Stacey Compton. The Foyt team really wasn't competitive, and Mike would end up having just 1 top 10, a 10th place run at Bristol. Mike also returned to the Truck Series that year, driving Ken Schrader's number 52 4 times, earning 2 top 10s. In 2003, Mike returned to racing in the Busch Series with the Biaggi brothers. He again drove the number 4 Geico car and earned a 4th place finish in the season opener at Daytona. He'd earned just 2 more top 10s that season and finished 13th in points. In the Cup Series, he began what will become a long-term relationship with team owner James Finch. He drove Finch's number 09 Dodge in 6 races that season, finishing 9th in the Daytona 500 and 10th at Talladega in the fall. He also drove 8 races for MB2 Motorsports in the number 01 US Army Pontiac. Regular driver Jerry Nadeau suffered what ended up being a career-ending injury, and the team used several drivers to finish out the year. And of course, Mike also raced in the Truck Series that year. He drove 2 races for Ken Schrader's team and 2 races for Breback Racing, earning 1 top 10 overall. Mike kicked off 2004 by racing in Ken Schrader's truck at Daytona, finishing 3rd. He also kicked off his 3rd straight season with the Biaggi brothers, driving their very boring number 4 Geico Ford. It's just red. He drove the full season for the team and pulled off an underdog victory in the summer Daytona race after some contact between the leaders on the last lap. Sometimes it's just about being in the right place at the right time. It was his first Busch Series win in 10 years. The next week at Chicagoland, Mike almost went back-to-back trying to stretch a fuel run, but ended up running out of gas and handed the win to the most unlikely winner of all time, Justin Labonte. Should probably do a video about him sometime. Mike and the Biaggi team ended up having just 3 other top 10s to go along with their win and ended up 17th in points. Mike returned to the Cup Series partway through the season, making 3 starts for Arnold Motorsports in their number 50 Dodge and 3 starts in James Finch's number 09 Dodge. He actually had an incredible run at Richmond in the fall. He led 45 laps and finished in 7th. He would also race in the final 3 races of the season for Morgan McClure Motorsports in their legendary number 4 Chevy. He ended up signing with the team full-time for 2005. So Mike's now going to drive for one of the most legendary teams in NASCAR. But this is not the Morgan McClure Motorsports of the 1990s. They haven't won a race since 1998 and have just a handful of top 10s in that time. Mike would make 28 starts for the team that season, earning just 1 top 10 at Daytona in the summer. He was replaced by PJ Jones for the road courses and John Andretti at Michigan. He was later released by the team right before Homestead at the end of the year, with Todd Bodine taking the seat for that race. In the Busch and the Truck Series, Mike hopped from ride to ride. This really was the season of, oh, you need a driver for the race this week? Well, Mike Wallace is available and, he's always down. He drove for Dale Francis in a Pontiac at Daytona and drove a 2nd Busch car for James Finch at Talladega. He made 3 starts for Evernham Motorsports in the number 6 Dodge, had 2 top 10s. He drove his brother Rusty's car in 2 races and even took over the number 38 Aikens Motorsports Dodge for 5 races after they released Tyler Walker. So that's a lot of bouncing around, but we should take a closer look at one of those Busch races in 2005. The race at Gateway that year was titled the Wallace Family Tribute 250. The Wallaces are from Missouri, so they decided to take the opportunity to honor them. It was Rusty's last year in the sport and would probably be the last time the 3 Wallace brothers would have the opportunity to race against each other. Kenny was driving his usual number 22 PPC Racing Ford, Rusty was driving his own number 64 Dodge, and Mike drove for Evernham on that day. His team worked great strategy and got him in position for the win, but he wasn't able to get by eventual winner Reed Sorensen on the final restart. In the Truck Series, Mike made 5 starts in Darrell Waltrip's number 12 Toyota, earning 2 top 10s. So after a wacky year, Mike is now officially driven for 30 different car owners, which is ridiculous, and we're pretty sure now he's on pace to pass our incumbent strange starter, Mike Bliss, for the most owners driven for in a career. In 2006, Mike started the year with just a couple races on his schedule. He was scheduled to drive the first 2 Truck Series races of the season for HT Motorsports and had put a deal together with James Finch to run the Daytona 500. He started and finished 24th in that race. He ended up taking over James Finch's number 1 Dodge in the Busch Series at the Spring Phoenix race after the team released Jason Keller. He would run most of the rest of the season for the team, earning 2 top 5s and 3 top 10s. Back in Cup, he wound up attempting 5 more races with Finch's Cup team, but qualified for just 2 of them. He also drove BAM Racing's number 49 Dodge at Richmond, finishing 35th. But wait, there's more. He also ran 2 additional truck races for Billy Baloo Motorsports, one of which was the Truck Series inaugural race at Talladega. He led 4 laps in that race, but crashed out late. For 2007, Mike would return to a full-time ride in the Busch Series. James Finch signed him to run a second car, the number 7 Chevy, and look who the sponsor was, good old Geico. JJ Yaley was then signed to drive Finch's number 1 car and to serve as his teammate. It ended up being a horrendous year for both teams. Yaley had just 1 top 10 and failed to qualify for the season opening Daytona race. Mike didn't earn a single top 10 and ended up 11th in final points. In the Cup Series, he made just 2 starts that year, the first of which ended up being an unbelievable run in the Daytona 500. James Finch's team always built stout speedway cars, and it showed on that day. Wallace drove his number 09 Chevy to a 4th place finish in one of the most memorable Daytona 500s of all time. His only other Cup start that year came at the Fall Talladega race, filling in for an injured Ricky Rudd in the number 88 Robert Yates Racing Ford. But wait, there's more. Of course he also drove in the Truck Series that year. He drove at Daytona for Morgan Dollar in the number 46 and at Talladega for Germain Racing in the number 03 Toyota, but didn't crack the top 10 in either race. In 2008, Mike jumped ship in the newly renamed Nationwide Series to Germain Racing, but he brought the number 7 and sponsor Geico with him. He had a much better year, earning 8 top 10s and an average finish of 15th. He finished 8th in points and was proving that the old guys could still get it done if they had good equipment. Germain once again fielded a truck for him at the Fall Talladega race, where he finished 5th. In the Cup Series, Mike drove at the Fall Talladega race in Richard Childress Racing's R&D car, qualifying 6th but finishing 30th. He also drove Evernham Racing's number 10 Dodge at Charlotte the following week, as the team had decided to part ways with Patrick Carpentier. Despite his good showing in the Nationwide Series in 2008, Mike was not retained by Germain Racing for 2009. They opted to go with rookie driver Michael Annett. So like many times early in his career, Mike just rolled with whatever he could get. He almost made the Daytona 500 for TRG Motorsports in their number 71 Chevy, falling just 1 position short of transferring in through his dual race. Mike would end up attempting to qualify Larry Guntzman's number 64 car later that season, but ended up making just 2 starts, and they were both starting parks. In the Nationwide Series, he drove for JD Motorsports in a one-off at Daytona at the start of the year, finishing 19th. He returned to the team at Talladega and ended up making 16 starts for them altogether, as well as 1 start for Jimmy Means in the number 52. And of course he showed up at the Talladega truck race, this time driving the number 48 for Fast Track Racing, finishing 28th. But this was a milestone race in Mike's career, as it became the only time in NASCAR history that a father and daughter drove together in one of NASCAR's top 3 series. And Chrissy actually smoked him on that day. She finished 13th. Mike had clearly made an impression on JD Motorsports team owner Johnny Davis during the 2009 season, as Davis would hire him to drive the team's number 01 car full-time for the next 4 seasons. The team was and still is fairly underfunded, and Mike was only able to muster 4 top 10s and 1 top 5 during his 4 full seasons with the team. During that time, from 2010 to 2013, Mike attempted 2 Daytona 500s, but failed to qualify for both. He also made his final start at the Truck Series at Talladega in 2011. And boy, did he go out with a bang. Mike drove the number 33 truck for Kevin Harvick. He qualified 6th and dominated the race, leading over half the laps. On the final lap of the race, teammate Ron Hornaday hooked himself to Wallace's bumper and never wavered. He pushed Wallace to the final win of his NASCAR career. I will stand by the fact that Ron Hornaday had no intention of even trying to win that race. He was going to push Mike Wallace to the win come hell or high water. He wanted to see Mike win one more time in his career, and Mike deserved it. Wallace and Hornaday handed owner Kevin Harvick a 1-2 finish on a day where everyone was happy with the outcome. And that's the thing about strange starters. When they win, we all win. At the end of 2013, Mike was cut loose by JD Motorsports, and he wound up making 11 nationwide starts between JGL Racing, MBM Motorsports, and Mike Harmon's team. His best finish was a 10th at Daytona in the summer, driving JGL's number 93 Toyota. He also returned to the Cup Series that season, making 6 starts for Identity Ventures Racing, with a best finish of 26th. 2015 would mark the last time we saw Mike Wallace in NASCAR. He drove in the Daytona 500 that year for Jay Robinson, finishing 36th, and he drove in the Xfinity race that weekend for JGL, finishing 16th. So that's the end of Mike Wallace. Or is it? Mike has never officially retired and has recently announced that he'll return to racing in the Xfinity Series at the inaugural Indianapolis road course race later this season. If you look at his career stats, he's actually a sleeper on road courses. He's set to drive for JD Motorsports at age 61, and he's in for quite the challenge. As of the recording of this video, we're not sure if that deal is still in place due to the coronavirus pandemic, but we're really hoping we get to see Mike Wallace in a car one more time. So that's a wacky and wild career. Mike rarely ran more than 2 or 3 seasons with the same team and always had multiple side hustles going. I think the thing Mike must have done masterfully was keeping great relationships in the garage. He was able to finesse his way to good rides in cars even on the back end of his career. The most important thing for a driver on the outside looking in is to be personable and likable. Nobody wants to hire a dick. Although Mike is the forgotten Wallace brother, he's definitely going to end up being the strangest of the 3, and that's what really matters. Although Kenny had a pretty weird career as well, so maybe if we actually analyzed it, Kenny would end up being stranger. But that's not important. What is important is that Mike Wallace ended up driving in points-paying races for 47 different owners over his 806 starts in NASCAR's top 3 series. If you do the math, that comes out to 17 races per owner, half a season. And that's unfathomable. You're strange, Mike. Congrats.